Big things will be coming from Shanks in 2021. And I don't mean like when a friend asks why you're so busy and you just tell them, oh, I got big things going on. No, I mean like Big News Morgan's big things. In his comment from the recent Jump Festa, Oda revealed that Shanks will make his move in 2021. With the exception of Marineford, Shanks has always sort of been in the background. So 2021 might be the year we finally see Shanks become an active player. That's why, in this discussion, I'm going to discuss 3 ways Shanks could shift the story of One Piece in a completely new direction. Be warned that this video does contain manga spoilers. Before I get started, make sure to share your thoughts on Shanks in 2021. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week in the next video. This week's comment comes from Axel Ablaze Productions. If you'd like more One Piece and Dr. Stone discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. With that out of the way, let's start by discussing Shanks and Wano. This isn't a super popular theory, but one that should still be addressed. Essentially, the idea is that Shanks would show up in Wano towards the end of the arc. He would show up to confront Big Mom and Kaido and resolve things like he did at Marineford. And there are a couple of things that actually support this theory. First is the simple fact that Shanks is an emperor. Since this is the Four Emperors saga, one might argue that there will eventually be some kind of clash between the four emperors. Now, while that is pretty fair reasoning, the name of this saga is simply too broad to point in any one direction. In other words, all the name really suggests is that this saga is about the four emperors. There's just too many ways it could all end and still be fitting. But you can also say Shanks is going to Wano because of his connections to Roger and Odin. Shanks inherited Roger's will, and he had a lot of respect for Odin. And this 20-year-old prophecy about the new dawn has been one of the major themes of Wano. So, one might argue that because of his connections to Roger and Odin, Shanks will go to Wano in order to personally witness the new dawn. Of course, this is assuming Luffy doesn't drop the ball and get his butt handed to him by Kaido. But even though this is probably the best reason why Shanks would go to Wano, there's a couple of reasons why it still seems unlikely. First, Shanks made a promise to wait for Luffy. Rather than go out of his way to find Luffy, Shanks has been patiently waiting for him to return the hat. This is why Shanks chose not to see Luffy at Marineford, because he would be breaking their promise. Speaking of which, the other reason is because Shanks is a pacifist. He's shown time and time again that he is opposed to needless fighting. The only reason he intervened at Marineford was in order to stop one of the biggest wars in history. Aside from that, Shanks is almost never involved in major fights or conflicts. He didn't stop Big Mom from taking Fishman Island. As far as we know, he had absolutely nothing to do with the Payback War. And like Whitebeard, Shanks never went to Wano to avenge Odin's death. So, because of his pacifism and his promise with Luffy, it doesn't seem like Shanks is going to Wano. But our next theory has a lot more going for it. This is the idea that Shanks is going to Elbaf. It's something I already covered before, so for the sake of time, I'll keep this relatively concise. If you would like to see my full explanation, then just use the link in the description. But the idea is basically that the arc following Wano will see Luffy finally meet Shanks for a competition in Elbaf. Like I mentioned earlier, Shanks is very clearly a pacifist. And as you may remember, the people of Elbaf share a similar philosophy. According to Dory, whenever there is a dispute, the god of Elbaf decides who is right and lets them live. In this sense, Shanks is connected to Elbaf by a common belief in just war. And if you think about it, there is a sort of dispute between Shanks and Luffy. Assuming Luffy doesn't drop the ball and manages to beat Big Mom and Kaido, he'll be that much closer to being as great a pirate as Shanks. At that point, it would make sense for Luffy and Shanks to finally meet and decide who is the greater pirate. And what better place to settle a dispute than Elbaf? There's also a bunch of other reasons supporting this theory, like Usopp needing to visit Elbaf, the island itself being a major part of the story time and time again, and I don't know, the fact that Vikings are freaking awesome. But I should point out that in my previous video, I explained why Luffy would go to Elbaf assuming Shanks was already there. I never actually considered why Shanks would want to go there. And this is where one might respond to the Elbaf theory by claiming that Shanks has no real reason to go there. Like I mentioned earlier, Shanks has never gone out of his way to find Luffy. So rather than change that now, it's just as likely that Shanks decides it's not quite time to meet Luffy. And due to a certain agenda that I'll address in a few seconds, it might be the case that Shanks simply has other business to take care of. As much as I'd like to see One Piece Skyrim Edition, we can't really treat it as a given unless we can determine Shanks' reasons for going there. But despite the uncertainty, there's still plenty of evidence to suggest that Shanks could be going to Elbaf. Now, for the final theory, let me address that agenda I just mentioned. This is the idea that Shanks will finally confront Blackbeard. And this one isn't even a question of whether it will happen. With so many instances of Shanks actively trying to stop Blackbeard, it's really more a question of when it will happen. The first instance we get is the meeting between Shanks and Whitebeard. Shanks seeks out Whitebeard and requests he stop Ace from chasing Blackbeard. What's funny is that Shanks goes out of his way to explain how dangerous Blackbeard will become, but then claims they should leave him alone to avoid conflict. It makes sense considering he's a pacifist, but it's kind of weird how Shanks approaches things. Obviously, it was a high-risk situation for Ace, but Shanks doesn't even suggest teaming up to stop Blackbeard for good. In this instance, he expresses an interest to avoid Blackbeard altogether. But things are a bit different when the two of them meet at Marineford. This time, Shanks shows up and threatens to fight everyone in order to stop the war. Before Blackbeard can even say anything, Shanks asks him if he still wants to fight. Blackbeard refuses before making his escape, which is completely understandable. Blackbeard had just got done flexing on literally everyone, so it was pretty smart of him to end things on a high note. So in this instance, Shanks expresses a willingness to take on Blackbeard. Granted, it wasn't directed at him specifically, but it was a willingness nonetheless. The more recent case comes when Shanks meets with the Five Elders. Actually, that's not technically right since Shanks doesn't mention Blackbeard's name. All we know is Shanks requested a meeting with the Five Elders and then says he wants to talk about a certain pirate. Given that we don't know what his plans are, it's hard to say who Shanks was actually talking about. But since we know he's very aware of Blackbeard's potential for danger, it's reasonable to predict that this is who Shanks had in mind. So looking at these three cases, we see that Shanks is increasingly interested in actively stopping Blackbeard. At this point, I think it's worth noting a potential counter-argument. One might argue that Shanks is still unwilling to actually start a fight with Blackbeard because of his pacifism. And while there is merit to the idea, Shanks' previous actions suggest otherwise. Remember, Shanks went out of his way to engage Kaido before Marineford. We don't know if they actually fought, but it's safe to assume that's what Shanks would do in order to mitigate the war. Then Shanks goes out of his way to start a fight with everyone at Marineford, all in order to stop the increasing death toll. Based off these two cases, it's likely the case that Shanks is willing to fight Blackbeard, knowing that Blackbeard will eventually plunge the world into chaos. Question is, what does he actually have planned? It's easy to just say Shanks wants to take out Blackbeard, but that doesn't really help us predict how things will actually play out. As he explains to Whitebeard, Shanks clearly understands that Blackbeard is a mastermind when it comes to planning, except when those plans involve poison. Suddenly, the guy doesn't seem so smart. But since Shanks understands Blackbeard's talent for scheming, he knows that he can't just rush him. Instead, Shanks needs to have a plan of his own. And while this could really play out a number of ways, it seems Oda might have given us a hint in chapter 956. Following the news about Sabo, Blackbeard says, "If the Navy is only going to take it, I might as well claim the prize." Again, this panel comes with a bunch of reactions to the Sabo news, so Blackbeard is likely talking about Sabo. And if Sabo actually died, then Blackbeard is probably planning to get his hands on the Flame fruit. Blackbeard was interested in having Ace join him, and he is a devil fruit hunter, so it's a rather safe bet. If that is the case, then this is the perfect chance for Shanks to ambush Blackbeard. Basically, Shanks could team up with the government, send a massive fleet, and wipe out Blackbeard's crew in a massive naval battle. Of course, this is all pretty open-ended, and there's still a bunch of ways this can go down. And that's not even considering whether or not Shanks would even manage to survive any of these situations. For all we know, Blackbeard might end up making Shanks' head match his arm. Regardless, assuming he doesn't go to Wano or Elbaf, it looks like Shanks will finally fight Blackbeard. And that's it for this discussion. As you can tell, I can't wait to see what Shanks does in 2021. If you enjoyed this discussion, then make sure to like the video. If you'd like more discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe for weekly One Piece and Dr. Stone videos. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.